Hello and welcome to Wake Up America Ministries. We have a very encouraging word for you here today. The title of our message is called Making Lemonade. And so I would ask you, have you ever had a bad day, or maybe you've had a bad week, or for some, maybe you've had a bad year or years even? And life has a way of throwing trying times and events at us, and the Bible calls these things fiery trials, and they will come. And I was thinking about this just a few moments ago before we started this video. Even if you're very young, you can have trying times. And I remember whenever I was a student, and when they actually made you work in school. And I'm kidding there, kind of, because the kids don't work, I don't think, as hard as we did, but still, nonetheless, school can be stressful. And so, for you young people that may watch this video today, just keep this in mind as we're going through this lesson. Maybe it's tests, or maybe you're trying out for a sports team or cheerleading, or if you, I don't know, does the school even have like we used to have like a drama thing in school, and they done plays and stuff like that. But whatever it is, maybe you're going to be in a pageant of some sort, or even going to the prom can be stressful. But you know, teens have stress in their life too, and I think sometimes the older we get, uh, the more maybe we forget about how stressful their life can be. But it can be very stressful. And then the adult life, of course, has its own stresses with the job and interviews, and maybe you're looking for a better job, and all of these things can be very stressful in your life, cause great distress even. And then, of course, there's things that come along in life, like maybe you've been in a car accident, or someone you love close to you, or death in the family, or maybe it's divorce or marriage problems or finances or whatever the stress of the life of your life may be. Um, it can be very trying time. So today we're going to look at somebody that had a very stressful day, and his name was David. He was not king yet, but he had been anointed king. And we're going to be reading from 1 Samuel chapter 30, verses 1 through 6. And we're going to talk about a day in the life of David. And so it says here, and it came to pass, when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the third day, that the Amalekites had invaded the south, and Ziklag had smitten Ziklag, and burned it with fire, and had taken the women captives that were therein. They slew not any, either great or small, but carried them away, and went on their way. So David and his men came to the city, and behold, it was burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters were taken captives. Then David and the people that were with him lifted up their voice and wept until they had no more power to weep. And David's two wives were taken captives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail the wife of Nabal the Carmelite. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spake of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters. But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. So I was reading this, and I was reading this a little bit differently than I probably ever had before, because I've read this many times, and I'm sure you've heard many messages that have been preached about this particular passage. And I was just wondering, like, how much time passed between verse 4, this time of weeping, and it says here that they wept until they had no more power to weep. In other words, they cried their eyes out, literally. Not literally, but their tears had dried up to the point that they couldn't cry anymore. But yet, I can imagine that when you realize that your family, your wife, your children, maybe even grandchildren, I don't know, but people that you love dearly have been taken captive by an enemy of basically yours. Because remember, at this time, David was living in Ziklag, and he was living among his enemies because he was running from King Saul, who was constantly trying to kill him. But anyway, so there's this time of weeping, and then if you look at verse 5, And of course, reading between the lines here, it says, "And David's two wives were taken captive." And going to verse 6, it says, "And the people uh, became very angry with David." They were so angry with David because they, I guess, felt like David had let them down. David couldn't control the events that happened that day, but nonetheless, he was their leader, and they went from sorrow and weeping to now anger, and even to the point that they wanted to stone David. And so I was wondering, from the time that they realized what had happened, I wonder how much time maybe they spent searching, maybe house to house, or going out into the hedges and the byways, or even the hills if they were nearby, and looking for people that may have survived this attack before they fully realized everybody was gone. Um, I guess the good thing here is they wasn't finding any dead bodies, so maybe they had hope in their hearts that their loved ones had maybe fled and hid themselves. And so, I don't know, it don't say this, but these are just questions that I posed in my mind. So how much time before it came to the point, whereas in verse 7, where in verse 6, where it says that David encouraged himself in the Lord. Because David, I'm sure, he loved his two wives dearly, and they may have had children at this time. I didn't go back and research it to see, but regardless of whether they did or they didn't, he had something here to lose. And I can imagine that the stress that he felt upon him was very great. And so David, he turned to the Lord and he encouraged himself. And I just wonder how he really did that. This came up in Sunday school last week. We were talking about Daniel. We were reading in the book of Daniel, and Daniel was reflecting upon Israel's past as he was confessing the sins of the nation before the Lord, even though Daniel himself had not sinned. And so it's a unique comparison here that we have where Daniel's reflecting on the past. And I wonder if David had time to start thinking about, well, Lord, I remember when I was a teenager, and I remember when I was watching over my father's flock that I killed a lion who came to get a sheep. And I remember, Lord, that there was a bear that came to get a sheep. And I took him by his beard, and that's the way the Bible describes it. It says he grabbed him by his beard and slew him. So he's, as a young boy, as a teenager, he's killed a lion and a bear. Now, how many of us, because now think about David, David didn't have a 30-06, he didn't have an AR-15, he didn't have anything other than probably a sling, a spear, or maybe some kind of staff. And so David had to kill these two ferocious beasts, is what I would call them, beasts I wouldn't want to face. And look, it'd be my thing. Look, you can have the sheep. It's one, and I'm sure his father had thousands, but David said, "No, you're not getting one." And so then there was the time when, the giants, the Philistines, came against Israelite, and they had been tormenting the people. Goliath had been for many, many days, and here comes little David, and we know the story there that he slew Goliath, with a stone, with a sling, and then cut his head off. So, a great victory for David, that God obviously intervened on Israel's behalf and used David to do that. And then there was the two times that King Saul actually threw a javelin at David while he played the harp trying to kill him. And then Saul chased David all over the land to the point that, it was over a period of years, but to the point that they actually hid in caves at times. And we know that story where, David and his men are hiding in a cave from Saul and his army, and then Saul comes and camps out or takes rest in the cave where David is. And then, David had enough wisdom about him not to touch God's anointed. And so, I can imagine that through all of these times, there was a lot of stress And it's not constant stress solving, but you know how it comes. It lasts a few days, sometimes a little longer, and then you get through it, and then that stress is eased. But how many times up to the point where he became king, as we're talking about here today? Um, how many times? But the Bible says that 21 times Saul attempted to kill David. And we know that David wrote many, many Psalms. Some sources say as many as 73 or even 75, just depends on your interpretation of who wrote what. But we know that David actually wrote 73 of the 150 Psalms. And many times the Psalms, David, he relays to us how distressed, how oppressed, how maybe even frightened that he was. But David had this unique ability to always remember that the Lord was his help. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on today is remember that whenever life does come and things are difficult, that you have the Lord to fall back on. So um, if David can do it, we can too. We can reflect on the things and the times that God has done for us. And sometimes I know that's very difficult. I know, especially in the death of a parent or a grandparent, or, you know, hopefully none of us have experienced it. We haven't, and I hope we never do, the death of a child. I can imagine that those times are extremely stressful. There's a lot of pain in your heart. It's hard to maybe focus and to really think about the things of God because you're so focused on the event that's taking place. I, I mean, I get that. But in all of that, if we can bring ourselves to a point where we can remember, God, I remember when you saved me. God, I remember when you spared me from, I was sitting at the red light. Excuse me. I was sitting at the red light, and this happened to me many times actually, where I'm the first car sitting at the red light, my light turns green, and I've always made it a habit after witnessing a couple of wrecks when I was young, or one in particular, but um, not to just jump on the gas and go. I always look, and I can't tell you how many times that I've been that first car, and I looked before I went, and somebody ran the red light. I can't tell you how many times that that has happened. And to me, I see that as God has taught me a lesson, and that He's using that knowledge to spare my life on all of these occasions. That's the way I kind of see it. You may not, but that's fine. That's the way I see it. I remember, in my life, at birth, I passed away 4 times when I was a little baby. I was just born. I was a preemie. I had my lungs were not fully developed. So back in those days, they didn't have advanced life support for babies. They just had a nursery and they stuck you in there, and hopefully you made it. But anyway, and then there was that time in my life where I was in the Air Force and I passed out and in formation, and I hit my chin right up under here on a brick sidewalk, and the impact of it stopped my heart. And but God's hand was upon me because lo and behold, the base surgeon was about probably 6 or 8 feet away from me, sitting in a chair. And whenever I came to, they had uh, ripped open my dress jacket and they had done CPR on me, and I was sniffing the smelling salts when I actually came back to consciousness. And then, there's been times in my law enforcement career where, especially when I was real young in my law enforcement career, I made some critical mistakes that people had weapons. I remember I arrested a guy one night for DUI, and the guy I was with, we thought we patted him down pretty good, and I was in a patrol car, and it just had the old wire cage in the back, and I was getting in the car. He was in the back. I was getting in the car and getting ready to carry him to jail and do the test on him and all that. And he said, "Officer," he said, "I got something I need to tell you." And I'm like, "Okay, what is it, bud?" He said, "Well, I was just wondering, you want this gun that's in my pocket?" And, you know, at that point, I realized this guy could have just, you know, easily shot me in the back of the head. And, but, you know, luckily, he didn't want to do that. He wanted to live another day because, but anyway, so we dealt with that. But I see that as I made a critical mistake. I missed that gun being in his pocket. And I remember there was another time where I walked up on a car that was parked behind a warehouse in Vidalia one night, and it turns out it had been raining, so it was really late. It was 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was. But anyway, so I'm shining the takedown lights on the car, and I can't really see anything because the water's all reflected and beating the water, all that stuff. But anyway, I walked up on the car, and there's a guy sitting behind the steering wheel, and he appears to be asleep or passed out or whatever he was. But anyway, I knocked on the window several times, and he finally started kind of coming to a little bit, and got him to open the door a little bit. And just as soon as he did, he started trying to close the door. And so I remember that um, looking down, he had one hand in his lap between his legs, and I remember catching a glimpse of something shiny, and I realized he had a gun between his legs. And so before he fully came to and realized this was the police talking to him, I reached down and I grabbed the gun. And obviously I called for backup and we dealt with it. But then what I didn't know, and this just still today just kind of unnerves me, but what I didn't know or what I didn't ever see was there was another guy in the back seat with a sawed-off shotgun that was also passed out. Never saw him. And two other officers showed up, and we were dealing with the driver. And one of them looked in the back seat, and of course he immediately alerted everybody. But that was a very, very dangerous situation. And there had been some armed robberies in Vidalia, and it turns out that these two guys turned out to be the two guys that were doing some of those armed robberies. So, you know, once again, I can look back on that and I can see where God had His hand of protection upon me, and He spared me. And I'll give you another quick story just to show you know how we can reflect on God's goodness. Um, I was trying to catch up with two cars on the interstate one day. Checked them speeding, and I was trying to catch up. And my left rear tire blew out, and I was running well over 100, and thought I had it under control, right up to the point where um, suddenly I was looking at the traffic I had just passed. The car it spun around 180 degrees, and I'm sliding off the side of the interstate heading toward the tree line, and impacted uh, some, fortunately, Chinaberry trees, and of course it totaled the patrol car. But I walked away from that without a scratch. I was a little sore for a few days after that, but you know, I remember I was going down that embankment, and I was going by some really large trees. If you've been out on I-16, just uh, west of um, 297, then you know there were some big oak trees, some big pine trees, and I was flying by them, and all I can remember thinking is this is going to hurt, and because you didn't have a whole lot of time to do anything because the car was completely out of control. But again, I can see where God's hand was upon me, and then here we are today, you know, by God's providence, we're making this video for you to encourage you to remember the times when God has brought you through things when you're having a bad day. So I want you to remember this, that Hebrews 13 and 5, the Lord says, He said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. So you encourage yourself in the Lord, because there's going to be times when you're going to be the only person you got, maybe, especially for those few moments or that little bit of time or whatever. Or maybe you feel abandoned or all alone. There's just no help for you, but God is with you. Call out to Him. Remember what He's done for you, and then you can look forward to God. I know you brought me through all these things in the past. I know you'll do it again today, or you're going to do it again tomorrow, or however long it takes for you to get through the trial that you're in. He will do it. If you're faithful to Him, He will always be faithful to you. So we're going to close with this statement that when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. You know, the devil's going to throw us curveballs. He's going to try to trick us up, and he's going to try to make our life as uncomfortable and miserable as he can. But we don't have to accept the things that he tries to bring upon us. We can rebuke him in the name of the Lord. So be encouraged today. Uh, it will get better. So for whoever is going to listen to this today or in the days to come, if you're having kind of a rough time right now, remember this. It will get better. God will see you through it. Be faithful, and he'll be faithful back to you. Remember this too. Jesus is coming soon. Please, I beg you, be ready to go when that trumpet sounds. We'll see you next week. We thank you and we love you.